Hi, welcome to New Ways to Evolve, Change, and Grow. And today's guest is Johan Calleman, who has written this amazing book called Quantum Science of Psychedelics. And he will help us learn how we as humanity can evolve our consciousness and open our pineal gland and connect to a higher level of frequency for all of humanity. So welcome, Carl, to the show.
Hi, Brian. Good to be on your show. Again, I should say. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. So what the viewers really usually want to hear is some very clear information about the now. Do you have any good information on how we can all raise our frequencies and stay positive for the future, and give us any information about now?
Yeah, I think so. Especially when you're talking about raising vibrations or frequencies, that's really what the Mayan calendar system is about, because it is sort of a quantum structure of different levels, different frequencies. And one of the most important aspects of that is the highest of these frequencies, the top 9th level of the pyramid, if you look upon the pyramid as a metaphor for the Mayan calendar system. And that particular level, it's a highest quantum state. It's a state of unity, of developing your mind, your perception of reality, your creativity, and so forth, in such a way that it is consistent with the highest frequency of the universe. So what to do is then to go to a website that has the 9th wave and follow that particular wave over time. And you can find references to this website. I don't have the address here right now with me, but you can find it on my website, on my Facebook pages, and so forth. And this is all about being a tool for anyone who wants to develop the resonance, the highest frequency resonance in the universe. That's what I recommend people to do.
Beautiful. Hey, so on your website, can you help me find that right now? I'm going to show it to you. Can you see the website right now? On your screen.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so this is the 9th wave, the highest level of the Mayan calendar system. And the one that I say is the universe's purpose is to bring us back to a state of unity consciousness. And this goes up and down. But especially when as you can see there, as of today, we're actually on our way down. This is just the nature of things, that they alternate between peaks and valleys. And it's really the most important thing is to become aware of what does the peak mean for you, because that's where, this is a collective wave. Everyone is affected by it. But then we have all our individual, personal situation and purpose and so forth. And so this then, by following this particular wave, you can increasingly become aware of how you as an individual shall navigate these waves in such a way that your life becomes consistent with this highest level of consciousness in the universe.
Beautiful. So is that particular wave you showed us just one portion of many?
It's just, exactly. This is a one portion, and this is going on. This is the 93rd period of this. And it goes on. It doesn't end. These waves do not end. So it's just a portion, and then it comes a new wave and a new wave and a new wave. but you will experience people. I haven't heard anybody who has actually tried to follow this who has not experienced the ups and downs, and what given them some guidance as to what where they're supposed to go. But it's not something that just ends at a certain time. It just goes on, and you can learn from it at any point in time, really.
So another question is, this particular wave that you were showing is, I think, a 22-day cycle. Is that correct?
No, it was, it's a whole period is 36 days.
36 days.
So it's 18 days and then 18 days.
Okay. And then there are other aspects of the Mayan calendar that don't do 36 days, but instead some of them go really long and some of them very short. And all of those waves together give you an even greater amount of information. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So there are 9 waves, and each one has a frequency of its own, as you pointed out. And then the 9th wave is the highest. And then there's the lowest, which is the first wave. And there, one of these periods is as long as 2.5 billion years. So it's a tremendous speed up of time that has happened throughout the course of the universe. But as of 2011, recently, so to speak, this highest level of the universe was activated. And that creates, for the first time really in the history of the cosmos, the possibility for us to sort of return to a unity state of consciousness. And but all of these waves, all 9 waves, are developing different aspects of reality. And these are things that I detail in my books. But then together they form interference patterns, like different waves, they form interference patterns. And you might say that the total interference pattern of these 9 waves, they form an evolving quantum field. And that's really what's behind this creation. It's an evolving quantum field. And so it's not a static quantum field we're living in. We're living in an evolving quantum field. And depending on what our intentions are, and what we want to accomplish sometimes as individuals or so forth, we can focus on developing resonance with several of these different waves. I emphasize here the 9th wave because that's the top level, and it's about making this return to unity. But then, there are other aspects of reality that's developed by the lower levels, and they all have a place. You can't understand the totality of this creation without looking at the totality of the 9 waves.
Beautiful. So you mentioned earlier about the 36, this is a 36-day wave.
Yeah.
So 18 up and 18 down,
yes,
what it was?
Yeah.
So with that, you also mentioned sort of yin and yang, or like that there's black and white and good and bad and whatever else in that relationship. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it is like going up it's like light coming in the peak. And the way I experience this when I follow the 9th wave is that I much more forward movement for my intentions towards unity, you might say. A sense of forward movement. The challenges I tend to meet in those time periods helps me move forward, create new initiatives, or I mean, it could be just also mostly just about my own life, but it could also be something broader. That's the peaks. The valleys, on the other hand, is more about dealing with myself, reworking myself, because I again have to deal with the lower levels actually of this creation, whatever in the past that I have undealt with, that will come up in those down periods, so to speak. So in that sense, yes, you can talk about it as a yin and yang, or you can talk about it as a light and darkness, so to speak. Or you could say it's a forward and somewhat of a, not necessarily backward, more, but still something like that. Forward or rest, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I believe that every crisis is an opportunity to learn and grow, or every problem. And the trick with life is looking at yourself or looking at the problem as an opportunity, and then changing things in your life so that that problem doesn't show up again. And is that sort of what you were referring to? Is that when you're in the downtime, reflect, understand, and readjust your sails. It's sort of like you have no control over the wind. You only have control over adjusting your sails. And this is helpful, all this information. Yes.
Yeah. That's very well put. Yeah.
So with the 9 waves, the lower waves, they're like the base. They're the foundation. And as we get higher and higher, is it that more like in our body, our physical body, our mental mind, and then our evolving spirit? Is that sort of like that? And this consciousness that you're talking about in the 9th wave is more a connection to spirit or all? Is that something?
Yeah. Overall, I would say yes, very much so. But I would say, first of all, I would say that all of these waves emanate from the cosmos, from the source, the divine source. And doesn't mean that everything there is great, so to speak, but it all emanates from that source. But yes, that's how I see it. The lower waves, they start by, if you look about the creation of a human being, which is just one of the aspects of these waves, then you might say that especially the 4 lowest waves is about creating the biological body of ourselves. And then it sort of added to that comes higher levels, and that comes the spiritual levels, the mental levels, and then actually returning to that spiritual level in the highest level at the 9th stop. So it goes from, you can say, from matter to spirit, if you like, in this climb of 9 levels.
So how does that all relate to the tree of life and then eventually the plumed serpent?
Yeah. So these two, the tree of life, most people that study the mythology of ancient peoples, they will say that the tree of life is the most widespread of all ancient myths. You find it everywhere, more or less, and I have found it in all over, really. I mean I've met it in New Zealand, if you go as far as east as you can, and I met it among the Maya, and it's in my own ancestry, Viking ancestry from Scandinavia. They had this big Yggdrasil, which was the big tree of life, so to speak, and you have it in the Bible and so forth. So it's everywhere, really, in ancient traditions. And so you might wonder what's behind this, and it's obviously also that it plays such an important role, for instance, in the Bible, because it's in the first book of Genesis, it's there. But then combined with that, and then you have the biblical version is typical. You have the serpent. The serpent is coming from the tree of life. I could already now say, though, that the biblical version is kind of unique in that it curses the serpent. Almost all other traditions honors the serpent, and there are political reasons even for that, or you might say political reasons for that. But nonetheless, you can notice that even the Bible could not ignore the serpent. It has to be there. And
well, does that also relate to the dark and the light? That for every act of creation, there's an act of destruction, and for every act of destruction, there's an act of creation, and that we have to have both. We have to have a problem so that we can have, something to overcome and learn and grow from. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, and it's exciting. What you're talking about now is the same thing as with the waves. It's a creation, destruction, you might say, or you could go to the Hindu god Shiva, the creator and the destroyer, so to speak. The ancient peoples didn't look upon these two things as completely separate. They didn't think that it's just a creation. They recognized that over time there must be destructions in order to create the space for new creation to take place. So that is one of the aspects of this serpent. We already talked a little bit about that, how the Mayan calendar system includes as very significant components the waves, the serpents. As I say, these are actually what serpents really were the ancient people's best way of symbolizing a wave. If you have they didn't have any computers or any trigonometric tables or anything like that to make a nice sine wave. So they said, okay, it's a serpent out there that is creating this reality. Mm-hmm. And we should really look at that, how important this was to ancient peoples. I mean, the Australian Aborigines, their creator god was the rainbow serpent. And if you go to Amazonas, like I did with the ayahuasca ceremonies, they have the idea that the human beings are created by the great anaconda, big serpent. And then if you go to Mexico and Guatemala, if you go to Mexico, Chichen Itza is dedicated, the whole city, the most visited of the Mayan cities, is dedicated to the plumed serpent. And
it isn't on the beautiful day, on the equinox or the solstice, it shows up on the side, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
The shadow does.
A shadow. It's a light show, you might say, or the terraces form shadows so that on the staircase you will get the scales of the serpent that descends into the earth. And so this is really a symbol of how one of these creation waves is entering our planet. And but the fact that they built this pyramid to symbolize that just emphasizes how important these serpents were. Or as I would say today, because we are using different languages, nobody today would probably think there is an actual serpent out there, but we would be able to accept that, yeah, there is a wave movement that somehow creates the ups and downs of our reality. So these are the tree of life is then what the Mayan elders today would talk about, the heart of the heavens. It's probably what they would say. But what they're talking about then is also then what the world tree, or the cosmos, the cosmic center. Actually, the Maya had an idea of something they called the place of creation, which really was the tree of life, from which these waves emanated. And so then we can get the picture of waves emanating from a big cross in the universe, the tree of life, the place of creation. And we still can't see that place of creation, but it certainly was a reality to them. And one of the things that I think we should be aware of is that, according to this model of a pyramid, our consciousness, our perception of the world evolves, so that we make sort of quantum leaps between different ways of perceiving reality with each of these different levels. And what that means is that people that lived a couple of thousand years ago, their perception of the world was inherently different from what it is now, because they were living in another level, another quantum level, and where they perceived reality differently from where we are at the current time. And so the reason I'm saying that is that, just because most people today wouldn't be able to identify a plumed serpent or even feel it, that doesn't mean that they didn't feel it. They felt it, and they experienced it. They felt the wave movements of creation, because they were in another state of consciousness than that we are now. And this is a big part of this particular book, outlining what kinds of states of consciousness that humanity has gone through, and how that has shaped our history, and that comes back when you start looking at the effects of psychedelics, because that is one of the tools that human beings may have in order to reverse some of these states of consciousness, actually helping us to go back to a more basic state of consciousness, a more basic spiritual state of consciousness, where we can make a new integration of reality. So what I'm saying in this most recent book then is that without this kind of a quantum model that the Maya developed, we can't really understand why it is that we could travel to an entirely different world if we take a chemical substance or a plant or something like that. But through that, we can make the connection that if we understand that the kind of default state of consciousness we are in now hasn't always been the default state of consciousness. Earlier, there were other levels that provided the default state of consciousness for human beings. And that's where, the whole connection is, through this, the whole connection is being made between the effects of psychedelics and the Mayan cosmology of the 9 levels, the nine quantum states of the cosmos.
How does this also affect not only our mind and our emotions, but also our body, the DNA and all that structure? How does that all relate?
Well, one of the things that I'm saying in my book is that the role of DNA is vastly exaggerated. And I think that's something that's only come into clear view in the past 10 or 20 years. The way I look upon it is that our bodies and so forth are fairly direct products of these creation waves. That's the waves that create the basic anatomy and shape of our bodies, and then even creates our bodies in such a way that we can download mental and spiritual information. But I would say, the DNA has become a very popular thing, and over 70 years or something like that, and but it doesn't look like it has much to do with how our bodies are shaped, our anatomies, and so forth. And so I'm providing in this book another kind of theory of biological evolution, where everything ultimately is our bodies ultimately are reflections of quantum waves or interference patterns between quantum waves. And the reason that's important is that if you look upon the spiritual aspect of the human being as coming from the body and as coming from the which would mean that it came also from the DNA. That's the traditional or the sort of established paradigm that science works on today. But then, then in that model, you really cannot have such a thing as independently existing spirits. And independently existing spirits, I think, is a very important aspect, not only of understanding psychedelics, but it's also of understanding what happens after you die and even before you're born, and so forth. And so that's why I took the pain in this book to sort of provide some strong, fairly recent evidence that the role of DNA has been widely exaggerated, and really what shapes us is an underlying interference patterns of frequencies, and that's from what we have grown, and then you can understand spirit in a more spiritual way, so to speak.
Beautifully said, Carl. Thank you. So I myself have total belief in everything that you're saying as clear information. I had a near-death experience when I was 16 years old, so I actually got to go to this place where our spirit, not our body and our mind, but just this part of me, got to connect to the all, the collective, the all-knowing, and I was at that spot able to tap into what I would consider universal consciousness. Now, this sounds crazy, but it was heaven. That was what most people would describe as heaven, and not my mind, not my body was there, just this other aspect of me. Yeah. So there's been only two other things in the real world, if you want so to say, that have ever gotten me to that same level and same experience. One is meditation. When I drop into meditation, I sometimes can get to a place where I can connect to the all. The other spot that I've been able to do that at is when I've taken psychedelics. When I've taken psychedelics, I can fully understand that I am not my mind as we're taught. You're your mind, you are what you think. Yeah. Instead, I'm more of what I feel, and there's a connection to all. You can feel the energy of nature and God in nature and in every relationship. And so then when you fully understand that, you realize you're not just your body or just your mind, but you've got this eternal part to you, the spirit. And so the psychedelics have led me to another way of getting to heaven or understanding. And once I understood that, that connection to all, that connection, you can see yourself as an individual, but you can also see yourself as part of God, part of the all. And so psychedelics for me are a huge tool for some people to get to that place. Now, I've had all three: near death, meditation, and psychedelic. Can you explain your experience with psychedelics and how that's gotten you?
Yeah, no, first of all, it's very valuable that you have this triple experience, and you recognize something that is common to all of those seemingly quite different. Meditation, you change your thought patterns, and with psychedelics, you take some kind of a substance, and then with a near-death experience, it's hard to describe, but the fact is that you through three different types of experiences, you identified a common element, and that was this godlike and so forth.
Your universal connection to all, or God,
yes,
or nature, or something beyond just the physical and mental. It's a connection to,
yeah. So that really ties in with what I'm describing in this book, where I'm not trying to tell people that take psychedelics, it's the only way you can do something like that. Quite on the contrary. I mean, I do. Because I do outline almost a complete mechanism for how they work and how they influence our mind and brain. I argue that psychedelics is just is one variation of a theme, and that theme is sort of it's really about having the cosmic connection and not being blocked by the mind. The mind, as I talk about it here, is something we download. It's actually not produced by our brains. We download it from the cosmos. It's an aspect of these quantum states that the Maya calendar system would describe. And this mind that we download is actually also blocking our perception of the all, so to speak. So you might say the mind is very good for calculating and all these kind of things. So it has a place, but it also blocks us. It really does block us from this experience that you mentioned of sort of a divine source connection, so to speak. With that kind of a model, I basically present in this book that there are other things, other tools that people may use, whether it's meditation, holotropic breath work, diksha, or a number of different things there. And they're all variations of a theme. And psychedelics is part of that theme. It's one way of that theme, and it has certain characteristics that make it special and valuable and so forth, but it's not something that's completely different just because it's about a substance you ingest. That doesn't make it totally different from meditation, which doesn't use any substances, or say holotropic breath work, which is about breathing pattern. It's a variation of a theme, and I outline that in the book, and I think it's an important point to make, because there's been for a long time, it's starting to loosen up, but there's been a long condemnation, you might say, of psychedelics as being something wrong because it is a substance you take. It has that drug connotation, and but really with the kind of explanation that I provide as to how they work, they are not a drug in that sense. They are they influence our mind. They disengage in our mind in such a way that we open up to another resonance with these creation waves that allows us not only to experience the divine aspect of the divine anyway, but also all kinds of sometimes bizarre experiences or things that our normal mind default state wouldn't allow us to experience. It blocks us. And in India, for instance, they look upon the mind as something essentially negative. It's something that blocks your path to enlightenment. And there's a point to that way of arguing. But at the same time, you can say the mind has its place, because without that, we wouldn't be able to talk here on computers and everything else that was created by the mind. But the mind is not the best source for enlightenment. That's for sure.
So when I had my near-death experience, I had an a clear understanding that we are body, we are mind, we are spirit, and that spirit is eternal. That energy is connected to all, and it's eternal. And that in physics, they talk that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It only can change form. And that eternal energy, to me, evolves and changes form. So within that frequency of taking the psychedelics, it opened my mind frequency up to calming down and letting that spirit come through and connect to that all better. And quite often, it'd be like in music, you've got all these different notes that make up the chord or whatever that you're playing. And if you just play one all the time, which is the mind, that dominates the whole sound of the music. And when you calm that mind and start playing the body and the spirit and the rest of nature and humanity, your life gets much more fulfilling and rich. Instead of you being driven by this thing out of fear, the mind and ego are basically fear-driven. And so with that mind, ego, fear, most people have a fear of death. That's their first thing. And I find when you take the psychedelics or you have the experience of deep meditation or a near-death experience, you have no fear of death. And when you can overcome that fear of death, you get to connect to loving life and experiencing life in a better, more fulfilling way. And so I don't recommend, let's take psychedelics every day. But the couple little experiences that I've had have led me to a fuller understanding of the physical and the mental, and less, that's dominated less. It's been in balance more. Is that your experience?
Yeah, it is. First of all, when it comes to my own experience with psychedelics, I've had that experience of my own death in that state, and I think it really has lightened. I was not a person that walked around being afraid of dying, so to speak. I didn't even think about it. I thought I was immortal, but who knows what will happen, I was thinking. But then I had quite recently an experience in Mexico with this Sonoran desert toad secretion, which was really very, very powerful and overall very, very pleasant, you might say. But also this, I experienced my existence as ceasing, at coming, not existing anymore, so to speak, and which is what I understand as death, essentially. But then also this sort of the resurgence of that, and this is is an experience that I think is typical of shamans, the death and rebirth and so forth. And I think I have really, even though I wasn't a person that walked around being afraid of dying, I still feel it has changed my attitude considerably since then, and feeling much more light about the whole thing, dying or not dying. So I can relate to that, and also the part of what I review in this book is the research that have been taking place in different universities in the past 10 or 20 years about the therapeutic uses of psychedelics. And one of those uses is to study the people that are terminally ill. And it's the work of Dr. Grob especially. And so he studied a number of people that had been diagnosed with some terminal ill condition, cancer mostly, I think, and then gave them psilocybin, which is from magic mushrooms, and then had them have that experience. And what it turned out was that, of course, the psilocybin didn't help their cancer, or that wasn't the purpose, but they did have this experience that, life didn't end, the death wasn't an ending, that all these kind of things. So it was a significant positive result, in the sense that their fear associated with their condition was considerably decreased. And there is sort of some kind of a talking. You mentioned the mind, and how the mind is sort of single-minded. The mind is single-minded. What they find now, given, and I'm talking about these researchers in different universities that are starting to study the effects of psychedelics, is that especially those conditions where people are completely stuck in a rut, like the mind, single-minded things. That could be like addiction, or you could have depression, which is also, you get stuck in a rut. You just rehash the whole same view of life all the time in a negative way, or compulsive, obsessive disorders, which is also being very single-minded. Especially those kind of conditions where people have carved out a line, and they are limited by that. They're limited by that mindset, single-mindedness set. Especially those conditions are very well treated by psychedelic substances. So you can't, it's not like you can treat anything with it, or it doesn't have a positive therapeutic outcome with everything. If there is a person who is too chaotic and in that kind of situation, then psychedelic is probably not the right thing to treat that kind of person. But it is for those that have excessive single-mindedness, and where that translates into addiction, depression, or these things where you just go over and over the same thing. Where you are a subject, or you're subordinated to your mind. And the reason is that what psychedelics do is that they disengage temporarily this mind from, which is something we download, and you disengage that mind, and that opens up completely new possibilities. You can make connections between different aspects of life that your mind in your default state would prevent you from making?
My experience is related to fear and love as part of this yin and yang that we go through. That I normally am pretty happy and joyous person, and most of my experiences with mushrooms or LSD were 20 or 30 years ago. But a year ago, I had the worst year of my life. I had a really bad year, and for the first time in most of my life, I was actually in a muddled-minded state. I was feeling compressed, depressed, fearful, anxiety was showing up. And I had an opportunity, I had a weird little opportunity to do a little bit of psychedelics. And this odd little opportunity, in the old days, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have eaten an enormous amount of mushrooms to have this experience. And now I haven't done any drugs or alcohol for about 10 or 15 years now. And so I was told, you know, normally I would say, oh, give me 10 of those or give me a huge amount.
Yeah.
And my friend said, no, microdosing. And the quantity that I was given was basically $1 worth. $1 worth, and it was such a minute amount.
Yeah.
And here's what happened to me. It was like a shot of whiskey. It was just enough to loosen me up, and that loosening me up led me to a place where it was familiar. It was my old place where I was present in the moment. My anxiety went down. My stress and my fear went down, and my love went up. So suddenly I was appreciative, I was gratitude, I was in joy, I was in the moment. I wasn't worried about the past, worried about the future. No comparison, no judgment. I was present. And that energy is something that I had basically like the record jumping out of the groove. I was finally put back in that groove, and it cost $1 to do it. Put back in the groove, and then suddenly I remembered, oh, this is normal for me to be here.
Yeah.
So I feel as if some of those people that go through PTSD, you know, and they have trauma in their life, they've been thrown so far out of the groove that they need to be placed back. And so sometimes psychedelics and so on will place you in a place where love is the dominance, not fear, not anger, not regret, not argue, blame, and complain, but this place of like, I'm present in the moment, I don't need to judge, I can be... does this all relate to everything that you're saying also?
Well, I've never done that microdosing thing. No, I don't feel I have had exactly that kind of experience, but especially these most recent psychedelics, as I mentioned, I did it.
Didn't you lick the toad, if you know what I mean?
No. Yeah, I mean, that's how it... No, you breathe it in.
So breathe in.
Yeah, no. But it really, I came out quite changed, positively speaking, much more extrovert and so forth. And now, of course, things in the world have changed in these recent times that I don't really keep that up. But so I don't really have that experience of coming back to something that I was before. But I do have the experience of changing into a more open, broadened appreciation of life. Yeah.
Could you tell us what 90% of Earth's cultures have in common?
Okay. Well, that refers to shamanism. Shamanism it's a word that's used for so many things today, and it's about healing, and it can also be healing of society. And it's also somewhat of a worldview that incorporates the knowledge of the spirits around us. And usually if you would go to a school here and study religion, you would probably they would probably present shamanism as a fringe phenomenon, so to speak, because it's not really part of the major Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, or something like that. But what 90% of all the cultures on our planet actually do have some place for a person that's called a shaman. And so it's not, and historically speaking, it's probably been much, much more important, and it's just been gradually being pushed to the side by these, first by the big religions, and now more by a more secular worldview, and so forth. But traditionally speaking, then, if you check all the, as anthropologists will do, all the different indigenous peoples, especially all over the world, then you will find that 90% of them has somebody in the group, in the tribe, or in the community that they call a shaman, or some other word, meaning essentially somebody who knows, somebody who has a connection with the divine, somebody who knows how to travel into the spirit world. And psychedelics, some of these shamanic cultures will incorporate substances or plant medicines, or as tools for this kind of healing. But not all of them. Most of them don't, actually. But in the Americas, especially the different indigenous peoples in the Americas, whether it's in South America and in the Amazonas, or in Mexico, or so forth, it's very common that they use plant medicines or substances in order to bring about this journey to the other world, to this world of the spirits.
Can you explain how the pineal gland, which is in the brain there, is the seat of the soul, and how that also interacts with serotonin receptors?
Yeah. Okay, so traditionally, the pineal gland has been looked upon as the meeting point between spirit and body, you might say. And it's also the third eye is what it's sometimes referred to. And in Hindu tradition, Indian tradition, it's thought that enlightenment means that the pineal gland sees a light, so to speak. And so how that is connected to psychedelics is an interesting story. The way I look upon it is that the pineal gland is at the center of the human head, is the center of the brain. And so I look upon it as an anchoring point for the mind. We download the mind and from the cosmos, or from the cosmic center. We download the mind. And then if you take a psychedelic, it will, this mind will be disengaged. It will, yeah. So that's the main role that I see it as having. It is the anchoring point for the mind. And then it sort of fits into that whole model where you see the effects of psychedelics as coming from disengaging the mind, not destroying the mind, but at least temporarily disengaging the mind, so that you have a a total resonance with the cosmic waves that we talked about initially. And as you have that total resonance with the cosmic waves, you become integrated. You're open to completely different influences directly through from the cosmic source without being censored by the mind. You might say the mind actually does that. And so that's what I look upon as the main role of the pineal gland, as an anchoring point for the mind.
So when you talk about the mind downloading,
Yeah.
I have a very, very simple explanation of that for our listeners, which is a radio tuner is kind of similar to what you're talking about, where the information, your brain actually doesn't store information like the color red, the number 4, and this memory of eating a strawberry isn't in a place inside of the brain, but instead your brain tunes into the frequency. It's more of a radio tuner, and the information is out there. You know, we said energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only change form. But the thoughts and the frequency and the energy of our thoughts in collective thoughts are in all of the energy. In light and sound and magnetics and whatever else contain that. And they say crystals themselves contain energy and contain thought. And if you look at your computer or your watch, it's done with crystals. There's energy in that. That's the earth energy. And so within that, we tune into our frequency. We tune into the all that is in information. So that's how we connect in. It's not here. It's actually out in all.
Yeah. I perfectly agree with you. The brain doesn't do anything in isolation from the cosmos. It's all about a relationship to these cosmic waves that we can tune into, and without those waves, we wouldn't even be conscious, I would say. But you as you mentioned, crystals. I mean, there is an interesting peculiarity about the pineal gland and crystals, and that is that the pineal gland does have crystals in it. It has these are calcite crystals, and they are hexagonal. And what is interesting about that, there are many interesting things about it really, but one of them is that the same is true for the center of the earth. The same as is true for the center of our brain, which is that there are crystals. There is also crystals in the center of the earth, and they are partly hexagonal as well. And so the way I look upon our communication to the cosmic center is that essentially it goes through the earth to the galaxy and then up finally to the whole cosmos. And so the left hemisphere of our brain corresponds to the western hemisphere, the right hemisphere of our brain correspond to the eastern hemisphere of the planet. And so each one of us has a head which is in resonance with the whole planet. And that's part of what makes sense of how we take information from the cosmic center, is that it goes through the earth to ourselves. And that's where also this pineal gland with its crystals in the center, it makes sense because, you can see that we're tuned into to that.
Beautifully said, Carl. So I wonder if there's any advice you have for all of us as listeners for the evolution of consciousness and the transformation of consciousness and what your vision is for the future.
Yeah. So my own understanding of the evolution of consciousness is built on this Mayan pyramid, you might say. 9 levels, 9 quantum steps that humanity has climbed, or leaps that we have made. And the purpose, as I understand the cosmic purpose from this, is that we are to return to a state of unity, which is another quantum state, really. And in such a state, we will not project separation. We will not project separation on ourselves or on others. And we won't project any judgmental separation on ourselves or on others. And so the future of humanity is meant to make this final climb. And the possibility is now there since about 10 years into the past. But we will have to take that opportunity. And that we can, part of it is changing our lives in different directions that would be more conducive to this unity consciousness. But it's also about using tools to attain that. And what I argue then is, as I already said, there's a range of different things. There's a variation of a theme that includes psychedelics, because if the 9th wave is about, and the 9th state of consciousness is about unity consciousness, then we can understand that certain tools like psychedelics will open, it takes away the separating ability of the mind and open us up to that particular unity. And based on that unity, to that non-dualistic projections, non-dualistic perception of the world, we are able to walk in the direction of recreating the world from that higher state of consciousness that the 9th wave provides. And one of the interesting things about my recent book, I think, is that it points out that really psychedelics can be part of the cosmic plan in this particular sense. We looked initially a little bit about the sine wave form of the 9th wave, but it turns out that when you study how psychedelics have been introduced in humanity recently, in the past 100 years or so, it actually follows that kind of a wave itself. And what that's telling us is that this is part of the same cosmic plan, the same cosmic time wave plan, if you like. But anyway, so that's my vision of the future. It is that by increasingly going into this unity state of consciousness that is provided and supported by the 9th wave, we will be able to downplay all the much more unequal states of consciousness that existed previously in the history of humanity, and come to a world that is unified and also equal in value between all human beings, and also, and it comes from the same source, equality between ourselves and nature.
Which I believe that God is in nature and we are connected to nature, and we've been disconnected from nature through all of this technology. We used to chop wood and carry water, everyone did. Yeah. And then we got the Industrial Revolution, that was like the physical revolution. We had the Information Age, which was like all the technology and information suddenly. And now we're having a spiritual evolution or revolution, which is connecting to the all again. And so I believe it's sort of like we've come full circle, and now we can integrate and unify all three of the physical, mental, and spiritual into this wholeness and evolve as humanity. But we had to address Industrial Revolution, Information Age, and now this spiritual connection. And you're an amazingly prolific author. You've got some incredible books out there. I was first really connected with you when you wrote the Mayan calendar and the transformation of consciousness, which was many years ago. And then here, the second book, The Purposeful Universe. I've read and consumed that, and that was amazing. The Global Mind and the Rise of Civilization, and the 9 Waves of Creation. And so now this new book is The Quantum Science for Psychedelics. I'm very impressed by it. Like, here, I have it. And I highly recommend this. Is there anything that we've left out that we haven't covered that's super important for everyone to know about this?
Well, I think we covered many essential aspects. But the book is really written for people that want more evidence, more associations with other kind of phenomena, and I think, it provides, when it comes to psychedelics, on the one hand, it places them as a variation of a theme, but it also does provide, I would say, a complete explanation how they work, including the cosmological level, the experiential level, the psychological level, the pharmacological level, and the chemical level of these kind of experiences. So for those that want to make sense of that, I think that they will have to consider those kind of connections between the different levels. But I think we have covered many essential things here, but there's much more in this book. Thank you. Yeah.
So is the best way for people to connect with you either Calleman.com, spelled Calleman.com, or your Facebook page, which is Carl Calleman? Is there any other location that we should find you at?
I think this is fine. Those are fine. On my website, then there is the little envelope. If people can connect with me by writing to me, or they can become friends on Facebook. Either one works.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for an incredible conversation. And you're welcome to do this with me anytime you have information. I really enjoy all the information you've given people for how they can challenge themselves to learn and grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to reconnect with you. It's been a long time since I saw you like this.
All right. Well, blessings to you, and I hope you have a fantastic evolution here. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
All right.